In the quiet suburban landscape of Edmonton, Alberta, a chilling story was about to unfold. It was a tale that blurred the lines between cinematic fantasy and grim reality. A story that would forever be linked to a popular television show about a vigilante serial killer. Mark Twitchell, a young, ambitious filmmaker, lived in this ordinary world. He had a wife, a daughter, and a dream of making it big in the film industry. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, a dark and twisted obsession was taking root. He wasn't just a fan of stories. He wanted to live one out, crafting a real-life horror film with unsuspecting victims cast in the leading roles, a script that would ultimately lead to tragedy and expose the terrifying depths of his own mind. Twitchell's crime was not a sudden act of passion or a desperate move born of circumstance. It was a meticulously planned production, a sinister project he had been developing for months. He saw himself as a creative genius, a director manipulating events from behind the scenes. His garage was not just a place for storage or hobbies, it was transformed into a kill room, a stage set designed with chilling precision. He believed he could outsmart everyone, including the police, by following a narrative he had created. This narrative, however, was not entirely his own. It was heavily borrowed, inspired by the fictional world of Dexter Morgan, a character who expertly balanced a double life, a fact that would become a central theme in the investigation that followed his heinous actions. The community was stunned when the details emerged. How could a seemingly regular guy, a husband and father known for his creative pursuits, be capable of such calculated brutality? The case captivated Canada and the world, not just for its gruesome nature, but for its bizarre connection to pop culture. It served as a stark reminder that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly smile and a camera. The story of Mark Twitchell is a descent into the mind of a man who lost his grip on reality, choosing to script his own horror movie with real blood and real victims, forever branding himself as the Dexter Killer. This case forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about the influence of fiction on vulnerable minds. While millions watch shows like Dexter and understand the clear line between entertainment and real life, for Mark Twitchell that line had completely dissolved. He saw the show not as a piece of fiction, but as a blueprint, a how-to guide for his own dark ambitions. His story is a disturbing exploration of obsession, narcissism, and the terrifying consequences that can occur when a person's fantasy world spills over into the real one. It's a modern-day horror story, not one from a movie screen but one that played out in a quiet Canadian suburb, leaving a permanent scar on all who were touched by it. Mark Twitchell's early life gave few overt signs of the darkness that would later consume him. He grew up in a stable, middle-class family in Edmonton. He was known as a smart and creative kid, often praised for his imagination. From a young age, he was drawn to storytelling, particularly the epic worlds of science fiction and fantasy. He was an avid fan of the Star Wars franchise, and this passion ignited his dream of becoming a filmmaker. He didn't just want to watch movies. He wanted to create them, to build worlds and direct actors, to be the master of his own narrative. His ambition was palpable, and those around him saw a young man with a clear, if lofty, goal. He pursued this dream with determination, enrolling in the Radio and Television Arts program at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, or NAIT. Film school was his element. It was a place where he could hone his craft, learn the technical aspects of production, and collaborate with other aspiring artists. He was considered a dedicated student, eager to learn everything about screenwriting, directing, and editing. He worked on several student projects, always trying to push the boundaries of his creativity. His focus was often on genre films, science fiction, action, and horror, where he could explore complex plots and larger-than-life characters. He was building the skills he believed he needed to make his mark on the film industry. After graduating, Twitchell threw himself into the independent film scene in Edmonton. He was ambitious, perhaps to a fault, and desperately wanted to be seen as a successful director. He wrote and directed a Star Wars fan film, Secrets of the Rebellion, which gained some local attention and praise within the fan community. This taste of recognition only fueled his desire for more. He started his own production company and began working on more elaborate projects, including a feature film. However, the reality of independent filmmaking was harsh. It was a world of tight budgets, long hours, and constant setbacks. The glamour he envisioned was a far cry from the difficult, often frustrating work of getting a movie made. Despite his efforts, mainstream success remained elusive. He struggled to secure funding and find a wider audience for his work. This frustration began to fester, breeding a sense of entitlement and resentment. He felt his genius was being overlooked by a world that didn't appreciate his vision. It was during this period of professional disappointment that his interest took a darker turn. He was still a filmmaker, still a storyteller, but the stories he wanted to tell were becoming increasingly sinister. His ambition, once a source of creative energy, was slowly twisting into something far more dangerous, setting the stage for a real-life production that would have no second takes. As Mark Twitchell's filmmaking ambitions stalled, his fascination with a particular television show grew into a dangerous obsession. He became an ardent fan of Dexter, the hit Showtime series about a blood spatter analyst for the Miami Metro Police Department who secretly moonlights as a vigilante serial killer. Dexter Morgan was a complex character who channeled his homicidal urges, his so-called dark passenger, into a twisted code, targeting only other murderers who had escaped justice. For most viewers, Dexter was a compelling anti-hero, a fictional character in a world far removed from their own. But for Twitchell, Dexter was more than just entertainment. He was an inspiration, a role model. Twitchell didn't just watch the show, he studied it. He was captivated by Dexter's meticulous planning, his ability to create a kill room, and his cool, detached method of dispatching his victims. He admired the character's double life, the seamless way he blended his dark secrets with a facade of normalcy. Twitchell began to see parallels between himself and Dexter. He too felt like an outsider, someone with a hidden, superior understanding of the world. The show provided him with a narrative framework for the dark thoughts that were beginning to consume him. It gave him a language and a methodology for what he was contemplating, transforming vague, violent fantasies into a concrete, achievable plan. The concept of the dark passenger particularly resonated with Twitchell. He started to believe that he, too, had a hidden, darker side that needed to be unleashed. He began to blur the lines between his own identity and that of the fictional character he idolized. In his writings, he would later explore this theme, crafting a story about a man who becomes a killer after being inspired by a character much like Dexter. This wasn't just fan fiction, it was a rehearsal. He was using his skills as a writer and filmmaker to script his own transformation, casting himself in the lead role of a real-life killer who, like Dexter, believed he was in complete control of his destiny. This obsession became the driving force behind his actions. His admiration for Dexter Morgan went beyond simple fandom and morphed into a dangerous form of imitation. He saw the show's plot lines not as fiction, but as a viable instruction manual. The kill room, the plastic sheeting, the dismemberment of the body, all these elements from the show would later appear in his real-life crime. He was no longer just a filmmaker trying to create a story on screen. He was preparing to direct a real-life horror show, with himself as the star and Dexter Morgan as his guide. The line between being a fan and becoming the monster had been crossed. With his dark fantasy fully formed and his inspiration drawn from Dexter, Mark Twitchell began the pre-production phase of his horrifying plan. Like any director, he needed to cast his project, but his actors would be unsuspecting victims lured into a trap. He turned to the internet, a vast and anonymous space perfect for his sinister purpose. He created a fake online dating profile on the popular website Plenty of Fish. Posing as a woman named Sheena, he crafted an alluring but fictional persona designed to attract men. Twitchell used a photo of a friend's attractive acquaintance without her knowledge to make the profile seem legitimate and appealing. The profile was a carefully constructed lure. Sheena was portrayed as a fun-loving, adventurous woman, looking for a connection. Twitchell engaged in conversations with multiple men, patiently building trust and rapport. He was methodical in his approach, learning their routines, their interests, and their vulnerabilities. He was a predator hiding behind a keyboard, using the anonymity of the internet to mask his true identity and intentions. His goal was to find the right person, someone who would agree to meet in a secluded location where he would have complete control. The online world provided him with a hunting ground, a place where he could bait his trap without raising suspicion. He chose the location for his date with chilling precision. He rented a garage in a residential neighborhood in South Edmonton, ostensibly as a space to work on his film projects. This garage, however, was destined for a much darker purpose. He began transforming it into his own version of Dexter's kill room. He covered the walls and floor with plastic sheeting to contain any evidence. He assembled a grim collection of tools, knives, a stun baton, handcuffs, and a large table for his planned processing of the victim. Everything was set up like a movie scene, ready for the action to begin. He was the director, the set designer, and the lead actor in his own real-life horror film. Twitchell's plan was a terrifying fusion of his filmmaking skills and his murderous fantasies. He documented his preparations in a secret file on his laptop, a document he titled SKConfessions, Serial Killer Confessions. In it, he detailed his motivations, his methods, and his chillingly detached perspective on what he was about to do. He wrote about the thrill of the hunt, the excitement of the planning process, and his belief that he was embarking on a journey that would define him. He was no longer just Mark Twitchell, the struggling filmmaker. In his own mind, he was becoming the protagonist of his own dark story, and he was ready to cast his first victim. The first man to answer Mark Twitchell's sinister casting call was Gilles Tetrault. In early October 2008, after exchanging messages with the fake profile of Sheena, Tetrault agreed to meet for a date. The directions he received led him not to a coffee shop or a restaurant, but to the rented garage in Mill Woods. He was told that Sheena lived there and that he should come inside. Though he felt a sense of unease, he proceeded, expecting to meet the woman he had been chatting with online. The moment he stepped inside, the garage door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into near darkness and a terrifying reality he could never have imagined. The cozy date he had anticipated instantly turned into a nightmare. A man wearing a black and gold hockey mask appeared from the shadows, brandishing what looked like a handgun but was actually a stun baton. The attacker, Mark Twitchell, ordered Tetrault to the ground and told him this was a robbery. Tetrault was terrified but managed to keep his wits about him. He noticed that his attacker seemed somewhat hesitant, almost as if he were following a script. Twitchell bound Tetrault's hands with plastic zip ties and began to demand his banking information and passwords. But his focus seemed to be on something more than just money. A struggle for survival ensued. Tetrault, realizing his life was in grave danger, decided he had to fight back. He managed to distract his attacker by pretending to be compliant while secretly working to free himself. In a moment of chaos, he ripped the hockey mask from Twitchell's face, revealing the man beneath. This seemed to rattle Twitchell, breaking his carefully constructed narrative. Seizing the opportunity, Tetrault made a desperate run for the garage door. He managed to fumble it open and escape into the street, leaving a bewildered and enraged Twitchell behind. He ran for his life, not stopping until he reached a couple walking their dog, who helped him call the police. Despite his terrifying ordeal, Gilles Tetrault's initial report to the police was met with a degree of skepticism. The story sounded so bizarre, so much like something from a movie, that it was difficult to process. He had no serious injuries, and with few leads to go on, the investigation did not immediately gain traction. Tetrault, deeply shaken, tried to put the incident behind him, unaware that he had just escaped the clutches of a man who would not be deterred. For Mark Twitchell, this failure was not a warning, it was a lesson. He analyzed what went wrong, refined his script, and prepared to try again, determined that his next victim would not be so lucky. Undeterred by his failure to capture Gilles Tetrault, Mark Twitchell immediately began planning his next act. He saw the first attack not as a defeat, but as a dress rehearsal. He learned from his mistakes, and was determined to perfect his method. Just 1 week later, on October 10, 2008, he found his next target. John Brian Altinger, known as Johnny, was a 38-year-old computer technician who was also using the Plenty of Fish dating site. Like Tetrault, he was lured by the fake profile of Sheena and agreed to meet at the same garage address. Altinger, an outgoing and trusting man, told his friends about his upcoming date, even forwarding them the directions he had received. When Johnny Altinger entered the garage, the scene played out as Twitchell had intended. This time there was no escape. Twitchell, likely wearing his hockey mask again, ambushed Altinger. A violent struggle took place, but Twitchell ultimately overpowered his victim. He used a heavy pipe to bludgeon Altinger and then stabbed him to death. The gruesome act was the horrifying climax of the movie playing in Twitchell's head. He had finally succeeded in bringing his Dexter-inspired fantasy to life. In the cold, plastic-lined garage, he had committed murder, completing the transformation from aspiring filmmaker to real-life killer. After the murder, Twitchell began the grim task of covering his tracks, again mimicking the methods of his fictional idol. He attempted to dismember Altinger's body on the table he had prepared, a process he found far more difficult and messy than it appeared on television. He then transported the remains and disposed of them in a city sewer drain several blocks away. To create the illusion that Altinger had simply left town, Twitchell sent emails to Altinger's friends from his victim's email account. In the messages, he claimed that Altinger had met a wonderful woman named Jen, and had run off with her to Costa Rica for an extended vacation, a story just plausible enough to buy him some time. However, Altinger's friends were not convinced. The tone of the emails felt wrong, and it was completely out of character for him to leave without a word. They grew increasingly worried when he missed work and stopped responding to their messages. Their concern prompted them to report him missing to the Edmonton Police Service. They provided investigators with the crucial email containing the directions to the garage. This single piece of information would become the key that unlocked the entire case, leading police directly to Mark Twitchell's kill room and the dark secrets hidden within. The final scene had been shot, but the story was far from over. When Edmonton police investigators arrived at the rented garage, they walked onto a crime scene that was both meticulously planned and deeply flawed. Although Twitchell had attempted to clean the space, the distinct smell of bleach could not mask the truth. Using luminol, a chemical that reveals the presence of blood, forensic teams uncovered a chilling sight. The garage glowed with evidence of a violent struggle. Bloodstains were found on the floor, the walls, and the large table, confirming that this was no ordinary film set. The evidence pointed to a brutal homicide, and the man who had rented the garage, Mark Twitchell, immediately became the prime suspect in Johnny Altinger's disappearance. The most damning evidence, however, was found not in the garage, but on Twitchell's own laptop. Detectives discovered a deleted file that they were able to recover. The document, titled SKConfessions, was a stunning and horrifying piece of writing. It was a detailed first-person account of a man who lures victims to a kill room via an online dating site, murders one, and disposes of the body. The narrative mirrored the known facts of Altinger's disappearance and Tetriolt's attack with chilling accuracy. It was both a script and a diary, a step-by-step guide to the crimes he had committed. For investigators, it was a confession written before he was even caught, a filmmaker's final, twisted screenplay. During his trial in 2011, Mark Twitchell's defense was as audacious as his crimes. He claimed that the entire event was an elaborate work of art, a form of alternate reality game gone horribly wrong. He admitted to killing Altinger but argued it was in self-defense, insisting that Altinger had willingly participated in a fake murder scenario that unexpectedly turned real. He portrayed the SKConfessions document as pure fiction, a screenplay he was writing. However, the prosecution presented an overwhelming amount of evidence, including the testimony of the survivor, Gilles Tetriot, the forensic findings from the garage, and the detailed contents of his own written confession. The jury saw through his elaborate lies. On April 12, 2011, Mark Twitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The case of the Dexter Killer serves as a profound and disturbing cautionary tale for the digital age. It highlights the dangers of online interactions and the terrifying ease with which predators can create false identities to lure unsuspecting victims. More deeply, it is a stark warning about the perils of unchecked obsession and the catastrophic consequences of losing the ability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Mark Twitchell's story is a chilling reminder that while fiction can inspire and entertain, for a mind on the edge, it can also become a blueprint for real-world horror.